and welcome to everyone joining us today for this webinar on instructional support for effective large-scale reading interventions. As you're probably aware, this webinar is actually the second in a series of 3 webinars exploring the findings of 3 different briefs linked to the Learning at Scale study. So back in April, we ran a webinar, which I hope lots of you attended, looking at the instructional practices which were most commonly observed across successful large-scale reading programs. And welcome back to any of you who joined for that. Today, we're going to be exploring the sorts of instructional support that is required to help teachers deliver those practices. And then coming up on the 6th of July, we'll host our 3rd and final webinar, which will look at system supports. So the short video that we just played introduced some of the different aspects of instructional support that we're going to be talking about today in more detail. As I'm sure you're aware, the Learning at Scale research is being led by RTI International and is part of the Centre for Global Development Education Research Consortium funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. All 3 briefs, as well as the interim Learning at Scale study reports, are available through the bit.ly link on the bottom of your screens and hopefully coming up in the chat as well for those of you who prefer to click through on that. And we've also provided this QR code so you can hold up your phones and access the report and the briefs that way as well. And we'll keep those links and the QR code on the screen throughout today's presentation. So do, when you have a moment, please look at those materials, download them, save them. There's lots of really rich content in there as well. So before we go any further, I'd like to introduce myself quickly. I'm Alice Cornish. I'm a director at Better Purpose, and I've been invited by RTI International to moderate today's session. Our webinar is about 1 hour and 45 minutes long, and during that time that we have together, we're going to be diving into the key findings of the brief with 2 of the report authors, Dr. Matthew Jukes and Jessica Mejia. After that, we'll be asking you to share some quick reflections on what you've heard. So be sure to keep that in mind when you're listening to the overview and note down any thoughts that you have or questions that you might want to share. We are then delighted to have representatives from 3 of the programs featured in the study. We've got Dr. Jennifer Swift-Morgan from the Lecture Portus program in Senegal, Lydia Onwoha from the NEI Plus program in Nigeria, and Meenal Sada from SERI in India. And all of our speakers are going to be sharing their perspectives on the instructional supports that they saw make the biggest difference in these interventions. After we've heard from the programs, we'll invite all of our speakers, including the authors from the report, to join us in a live Q&A session. So you'll have lots of opportunity to pose your questions to them. Before we hand back to Matthew and Jessica, who will share some final thoughts and reflections. And then to close up, we will pass to Dr. Benjamin Piper from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who will share some final words before we finish up. So just a few housekeeping points. Please direct your questions to speakers through the Q&A channel on your screens and not through the chat. So we'll seek to answer as many of those questions as possible through that channel, and we'll also have some opportunity to pose some of those questions live later in the session. The chat we'd love to keep for your own reflections and comments, but not for questions. If you put questions in there, we may miss them, so please keep the questions in the Q&A. But we'd also love you to introduce yourselves in the chat. So hop onto there, tell us who you are, where you're dialing in from, which organisations you represent. We're really pleased to have you here and would love to learn more about you and who's in the room. The session is being recorded and a link will be made available afterwards. So look out for that in your inboxes and do share that link with others that you might find this conversation useful. And then if you're tweeting about today's session, please do use the hashtag Learning at Scale. We'd love to see people's thoughts online as well. So keep us in the loop by using that hashtag. And then finally, we really want your feedback on these briefs. So if you've already had a chance to take a look at the brief, we would love to hear what you think. And you can see on the screen and also being posted into the chat there's a link to a very short survey where we're inviting you to share your views on the brief. So if you've already had a chance to look at the brief, please click now into that survey and just share your thoughts very quickly. That's really appreciated. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Matthew Jukes and Jessica Mejia to walk you through what's in the brief. Dr. Jukes is a fellow and senior education evaluation specialist at RTI International, with 25 years of academic and professional experience in evaluating education projects, particularly in early grade literacy interventions. I've also been told it's his birthday today, so we're very pleased that he's spending his birthday talking to us and sharing this work that he's so passionate about. Jessica Mejia is a senior education research analyst in early grade reading, teacher training and teacher mentoring, with over 13 years of experience managing and supporting international education projects focused on improving teacher literacy instruction. So I will now pass over to the birthday boy himself, Dr. Jukes. Matthew, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alice. Just to say that great, you just fixed it. Great. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Alice, and thank you all for joining us. So we'll be talking about the second brief from the Learning at Scale program. And the Learning at Scale program was a research project aiming to identify the ingredients that were responsible for these 8 programs being successful at improving literacy outcomes at scale. So we were interested in ingredients at 3 levels: in the classroom, instructional practices, then the support that is given to teachers that enable them to implement those instructional practices, and then system level supports which enable effective instruction to take place. So we're interested in the second of that set of ingredients today. And our research question is, what methods of training and support lead to teachers adopting effective classroom practices and successful large-scale literacy programs? So next slide, please. So we identified programs that met a whole list of criteria, but the 2 that were most difficult to meet were that they were able to demonstrate effectiveness through impact evaluations, and that they were effective at scale, the large scale. And we found 8 programs that were able to do that. 2 of them are from West Africa, we'll be hearing from later, Lecture Portus in Senegal and NEI Plus in Nigeria. We also had Learning in Ghana, Equip T in Tanzania, Tusome in Kenya, the Pakistan Reading Program, and then 2 programs from India, SERI, which we'll also be hearing from later, and Read India. So next slide. So how did we address this research question that's on the screen? Well, I think it's worth saying at first that this wasn't a research project to unearth interesting, new, promising approaches to supporting teachers. It was really about finding practices that we could say with some degree of certainty were effective, that were supported by evidence. And that means that we were able to see from multiple perspectives and data sources, from our own observations, from program designers, from teachers, from coaches, from trainers, with opinions converging and data converging, supporting these practices. And we were also interested particularly in not just identifying the practices that were common to these programs, but really trying to nail those practices that were responsible for the outcomes that really led to the success of these programs. So in the next slide, we'll be presenting data from two sources. Firstly, an examination of the program designs and the implementation approaches across all 8 programs. And then because of COVID, we were only able to get to 3 programs with primary data collection before this analysis took place. So we'll be looking at some large-scale quantitative data and in-depth qualitative analyses to get the perspectives from teachers, from coaches, from trainers about the practices that were really responsible for the success in these programs. And so I'll hand over to Jessica to take you through those findings.
Thanks, Matthew, and good afternoon, morning, evening, everyone. I'm pretty sure we have folks from all over. I'm joining you today from sunny Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm glad to be with you. So as Matthew said, when we looked at this teacher support data, we really focused on figuring out what are the common elements across the different projects that led to success. So we found several that I'm going to talk about today. Let's start first with the high-level findings. So the high-level findings show about 3 common areas of teacher support: training, materials, and post-pedagogical support, either through coaching or sometimes they had community practice type meetings. And starting with the training in the first row on the top left, trainings included a focus on modeling and practice of instructional approach instead of a more traditional lecture-based training. So we know this is important because adult learning research tells us that adults learn by doing, and they're going to be much more motivated to learn if the content is obviously relevant to kind of their everyday jobs and what they're trying to do. Also, in the next box over, you'll see that initial trainings for these projects were typically face-to-face trainings, helping teachers to engage with each other and also with trainers and the content. In the second row on the left, teacher's guides simplified the instructional process. So guides generally included an easy to follow format, maybe probably a clear scope and sequence of content and steps, like step-by-step instructions for how teachers should implement activities and different instructional practices. So this probably made teachers' jobs easier rather than harder, even though they're trying a new kind of instructional practice. And that also probably leads to them wanting to change their behavior a lot more. In the box to the right, you can see the programs focused on making sure that all students had a book, which may not have always been the case in previous to the project. Some places like in Kenya, for example, the average ratio was maybe a 3-to-1 or a 5-to-1 book to student ratio. And now we can move to, let's see, now we'll move to the third row, and we'll talk about the teacher support. Teacher support was seen as collaborative and positive, and that was mainly the trainers and their kind of relationship with teachers. It helped them to feel safe and really get information that they needed and be able to ask questions and things like that. And the next box over shows the support focused on increasing teachers' confidence. This kind of goes back to the modeling and practice that we talked about in the first box, but just generally teachers are starting to feel better and better about being able to implement in the classroom once they left the training. Finally, let's move on to the right side. The findings turn to coaching and these kind of communities of practice meetings. Across projects, coaches were provided structure in how they supported teachers. So this meant not only were they trained, but often they had tools that kind of helped them kind of focus their observations and helped maybe provide some guidance on kinds of feedback to give to teachers as well. And then the last box on the bottom right shows that across projects, teacher support happened frequently and helped teachers to solve problems that they were facing. Projects generally had really kind of frequent touch points with teachers, not just training, but coaching. And then if they also maybe had these meetings on a regular basis, there were lots of ways that teachers could get help. And also if teachers were meeting with other teachers, they could use each other as ways to kind of solve problems and exchange lessons learned. So now let's go further into the data and let's look at the structured interview data. In the first slide we'll look at is on program designs. So Matthew mentioned that we looked across programs to find common elements, and here in this slide are the 5 kind of support elements that we found across all projects. And you'll see they're very reminiscent of the high-level findings. So the first one, practicing pedagogical skills that the new instructional approach requires. This refers to training, emphasizing time on practicing skills, as we said, for the new approach. And the second one was initial face-to-face training. This training being face-to-face, like I said, likely made it easier for teachers to kind of connect with content, but also connect with trainers and other teachers. The third is the provision of structured teachers guides. As we said earlier, these guides could be a way for teachers to really know how to implement the instruction, especially once they left the training and were alone in their classroom. The fourth is the coaches were supported with structured tools. So these tools, again, are just like, I can't tell you how probably important they were. And often some of these coaches are not necessarily primary level teachers. They could have been secondary level teachers, or, you know, from other parts of the education ministry. So having some tools and structures and guides was really showed to be helpful across these different projects. And finally, the fifth element is the provision of high quality student books. So having books that not only aligned with the teacher's guide, were also thoughtfully sequenced with content. And I mean, often these had very interesting illustrations. So children, you know, we got a lot of conversation from teachers that children were really engaged and really enjoyed these books. But also, more importantly than that, it really meant that students had text right in front of them rather than having to look at the board or lean over 2 or 3 children to see even a word. And so they were really being able to focus their eyes on print much more than they had before. And now we'll go to the next slide and look at some more data on training. Great. So in this figure, you can see this is about teachers' experience in training. We asked teachers which training methods were used more frequently in trainings for the programs that they were in than previous trainings that they had visited or had attended, excuse me. So for example, if you look at the discussion data here, you can see in the middle that 49% of teachers in the EQUIP-T program said that modeling was used more in this training than previous trainings. So you can see that more teachers said discussion and small group practice were frequently used in their current program trainings, followed by modeling and large group practice. So to break this down a little bit, discussion often is included in these trainings for time. It means that time the teachers have to ask questions and to really clarify things from the trainers. For example, in the Chusome program, there's time built in after each modeling session and each practice session for teachers, not only to share their experiences with the activity, but ask questions, and then trainers to also give feedback on the practice sessions that they saw. Another important thing to consider in this data is the distinction between group sizes for practice. So we asked about small practice and large practice. The smaller group practice or even pair type practicing is really kind of important because they're much more likely to allow teachers to practice every single time. So if you think about you have 20 minutes and only 2 teachers, then each teacher will have a chance to practice. Whereas in a large group, if there are 15 teachers, it's more likely that maybe 2 of those 15 teachers get to practice. So that's a very different kind of practice session for sure. But maybe the most important takeaway just from this particular set of data is that to say that the trainings in all of these programs seem to have moved away from this traditional lecture to a format towards training where teachers are highly engaged and teachers are spending a lot more time like digging in and actually doing the thing that they're going to do in the classroom than just sitting and learning something very abstract. And as we said before, this is very in line with adult learning research and was likely very different from what teachers had been seeing in previous trainings. So let's move on to the last figure. This one is more focused on coaching. We asked coaches what they thought the purpose of coaching was. And in this figure, you can see that coaches thought there were multiple purposes of coaching, from improving teaching, evaluating teachers, ensuring teachers are on the right lesson, informing teachers of their mistakes, and then finally a school inspection. The concept of teacher coaching, like actual coaching or mentoring, may not have really been that common before these programs. So it is likely that teachers were very used to having some kind of an inspection, and that coaches probably thought coaching meant inspection before their trainings and before participating in this in these programs. So, but you can see on the far right of this graph that fewer coaches chose school inspection as the actual purpose of coaching. So only about 4% of Tusome coaches and about 36% of the Siri coaches chose inspection as one of the purposes. This is compared to on the far left, where 65% of Tusome coaches and 86% of Siri coaches said that the purpose of coaching is to improve teaching in schools. The data shows that while some coaches are still talking or still choosing things like evaluating teachers and talking about their mistakes, there's still this kind of movement or leaning more towards kind of improving teaching and having a more collaborative conversation rather than this inspection type coaching or this inspection type visit where there might just have been an observation that teachers may never even have seen any kind of the evaluation that they got. So we're really excited that that has become something new and a regular practice of these programs. Now I think we'll look at the qualitative data. So in the qualitative data, there were kind of three big themes that came out of these interviews with teachers and coaches on this teacher support topic. The first theme will sound familiar to you, I think. The training improved teachers' self-efficacy, confidence, and motivation, especially because of the time to practice the instructional methods. This supports the findings of the structured interview, the high-level findings. This is, I think, something that we all can kind of agree is a really great outcome from these programs. You can see in quote 2, the teacher is talking about their confidence in modeling and doing the activities practically, that they feel like they used to teach upper primary before, but now they're really excited based on this training to come back to the primary level of teaching. So that's very exciting. And then quote 3, the teacher was not so confident at the beginning or in the phase 1 of the program, but at phase 2, they grew confident. The children started to do better. They were asking questions and they got a lot better with the techniques and felt a lot more confident to implement. Let's move on to the second theme from the qualitative results. This one says that collaborative and respectful professional relationships evolved between trainers and teachers. The relationship building between teachers and trainers, who were often teacher coaches as well in some of these programs, came across as key in teachers feeling like they could really ask questions and get help rather than be punished for mistakes, which was probably a common theme before these programs. This relationship really allows teachers to change from being kind of afraid of asking questions or making mistakes and just letting teachers really feel supported. So you can see quote 5, I believe. The trainers were very collaborative the way they engaged. They gave them some questions, directions on how to change so they could help one another. You can just really see like this teacher seems very comfortable and comfortable with the trainer and really liked being in that space. And so the final theme of the qualitative results that we have here today anyway, instructional materials made it easier to engage children and support teaching. As we saw in the previous data, high quality, thoughtful materials really seem to make a clear difference in teachers' ability to implement the new approaches. So you can see in quote 10, it's a pretty simple quote, but if you take a look, the teacher's guides give skills and direction on how to teach, including the 3-step teach a skill. So the 3 steps were part of the Equip T program. And this is a pretty simple quote, but also just, I think it really illustrates like these teacher's guides, having a teacher's guide that was clear and helpful, just really told them like how to do things and probably really led to teachers' willingness and excitement about implementing this new project. So now I'm going to hand it back to Matthew so that he can kind of sum up some of the data for us.
Great, thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, these are our implications, which we feel like we have strong evidence for. They really just follow the key findings that Jessica presented. There's a set of implications that I think come primarily from the design of programs and are supported by the interviews that we conducted. That teachers should be given opportunities to practice newly learned skills, preferably in a face-to-face training. and that both teachers and coaches should be given structured guidance in how to do their jobs. Teachers through structured guides, and scaffolded and focused guidance for coaches. And all of this should be supported with high quality student materials, preferably one per student. And then around the edge, you see some of the findings that we get really from understanding teachers' perspectives about what was effective, what constituted effective coaching. So that the recommendation is that ongoing support should be positive and collaborative, not an accountability focused inspection, and that coaching and support should target the confidence of teachers' decision making and to help them solve instructional problems themselves. So that's it for our implications. I'm looking forward to hearing how these practices play out in the three country presentations coming up, and I'm looking forward to hearing your comments. Somebody told me this morning that when it's your birthday, people shouldn't be allowed to disagree with you, but I just want to flag that I'm welcoming, supportive, as well as constructively challenging comments to our work. So looking forward to hearing what everyone's thoughts are.
Thanks so much, Matthew and Jessica, for running us through those findings. And as Matthew says, don't forget to ask your questions for Matthew and Jessica through the Q&A feature on Zoom. They'll also be back to join us live later in the session with the other speakers. Now, at this point, you've heard some of those key findings. We would love to get from you your reflections on what you've heard so far. So we're actually going to pause for 3 minutes for a short reflection break to give you the opportunity to comment on the reflections and the questions that arise for you at this stage in the webinar as a result of hearing those findings. So there's a link here on your screen, and it's going to appear in the chat, I believe, as well. So if everyone is able to copy that link into their browser or access it through your phone and provide some initial thoughts at this stage. While you do that, I'm going to pop on a timer and play some music, and then we'll regroup in 3 minutes to move on with the webinar. thank you so much for that and for sharing your thoughts. We at this stage are ready to move into our next session, and I'm delighted to pass over to Rachel Jordan, who's the Programme Manager for the Learning at Scale study, who's going to introduce our 3 programme speakers and lead us in a Q&A session after their presentation. So over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Alice, and I'm thrilled to be introducing our panel today. Our first panelist is Dr. Jennifer Swift Morgan. Jennifer is a senior advisor at Chemonics. She's an education and governance specialist with more than 20 years of experience working in Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East. Jennifer was the technical director of the USAID-funded program Lecture Produce. Our second panelist is Lydia Anwoha. Lydia was the Deputy Chief of Party of the USAID-funded Northern Education Initiative Plus project, and is currently the Deputy Chief of Party of the USAID-funded Leveraging Educational Assistance Resources. Lydia has over 30 years of experience in the Nigerian education sector. She has worked for 17 years as a classroom teacher and then as Deputy Director of Education at the Lagos State Ministry of Education. Our third panelist is Meenal Sarda. Meenal works with Room to Read's global office. She is the technical lead for the literacy program in South Asia. Meenal has extensive experience working for educational nonprofits and international organizations such as UNICEF and the Aga Khan Foundation. And Meenal will be talking today about her experiences and perspectives on the SERI program. And so just as a reminder, we'll first hear from all 3 of the panelists individually, and then we'll open things up for a Q&A session. So please continue to submit your questions through the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. And over to the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jennifer Swift Morgan, and I was the director for the technical assistance that supported Senegal's Lecture Produce reading reform program. And Lecture Produce was a 5-year program that just completed in the end of December 2021. And its goal was to dramatically increase reading outcomes for children in the earliest grades. It was supported by USAID and led by the Ministry of National Education in Senegal. With a great consortium of partners, we helped the ministry to reach this goal in a lot of ways. The program was in 6 regions in about half the country and in 3 different languages. And in that program, we were supporting about 15,000 teachers and over 600,000 students. In the very first cohort, we were able to get gains of reading from basically children not reading at baseline, 0.3%, to about 30% just with that first cohort. And to achieve these goals, a critical component of our theory of change was instructional support, getting the teachers the tools and support they needed to be able to get kids reading. And it was a part of the absolute priorities for the ministry to provide that support to teachers. And if you look at the list of everything teachers needed to master to get these kinds of results, it's truly astounding how much we were asking of them and continue to ask of our teachers. So everything from new scientific approaches to reading instruction, to national languages, using those for the first time for most teachers as the medium of instruction, to new lesson scopes and sequences, scope and sequence and lesson plans they've never used before, new and multiple different kinds of teaching and learning materials, new techniques for inclusivity based on the belief that all children can learn, which in itself was a new concept for many teachers. Then you throw in assessment, and then you have to communicate with the parents, and even mastering the different kinds of teacher support itself, being used to being coached or going to different kinds of workshops. All of that was new. And for most of these teachers, they had never received in their pre-service education any training specifically on reading or most of any of these techniques. So it was a huge ask that we were making of the teachers as part of this reform. And so of all the kinds of ways you can provide instructional support, Lecture Produce provided many of the things that you've heard about in the Learning at Scale study. And I would say that for us, there are probably 3 of the essential characteristics that were the most important. The first would be the teacher's guides and the connections between those guides and the student textbooks. These guides simplify the instructional process. It took away the guesswork. We didn't expect these teachers, again, who had no pre-service education on reading for the most part, and hadn't taught before in national languages. We didn't expect them to sit down and have to figure out their own lesson plans. And so the highly structured nature of those guides really is what we think resulted in the terrific instruction that we actually saw in the classroom. So we achieved nearly 90% time on task during reading lessons, meaning time actually spent on instruction and learning, which itself translated to the majority of that time, 60% in some observations, being spent on actual reading, kids really working through new text. And the majority of that time, again, it's individual students practicing different examples of reading text at the same skill level, getting teacher feedback that benefited the whole class. And that intersection between the guides and the textbooks, we think are probably at the core of the success of the program. But in addition to that, how you actually get teachers to use those materials, the second element we think is probably really critical to teacher support is face-to-face training. This was truly an important takeaway for us by the end of the program. And in addition to the learning at scale research, we were conducting our own research, particularly after introducing blended continuous professional development when the pandemic hit. So introducing self-guided modules, doing more at the local level with teacher learning circles, other aspects of technology. And at the end of the day, while those things were certainly helpful, we learned that it really is important to invest in the face-to-face, particularly at the beginning of a new school year where teachers can come together, get motivated for the reforms, for new teachers who are entering the program for the first time, and when reforms are first introduced. And regardless of the modality, that focus on practice, of modeling, of having the teachers actually do the work and get feedback from it was critical. Finally, the third element that we think was really important is the coaching of teachers. In Senegal, the ministry opted to use existing system actors who did not have a background in this kind of coaching and were not selected because of their skills. And they also had to fit all of this into their other work. And that was challenging in many ways. But my colleagues will talk about coaching and particularly the mentality and the shift in approach around coaching as one of the greatest legacies of the program. Yes, it's based on structured observation and different phases, but the most important thing was this effort to build a trusted relationship where the coach, who is either a school director or an inspector, also recognizes what the teacher is doing well, and they set together goals for improvement. And that person is really there as a support to the teacher. And in fact, we're going to see a couple of clips that shows what this coaching looks like in practice. Ay tutang lanu wa nom ñom ñaar ay xale yu dëgër lañ. On peut dire que la LPT nous a beaucoup apporté dans notre formation. La directrice, chaque mois, elle passe 2 fois dans ma classe pour m'encadrer, m'apporter des rectifications sur certaines leçons ou sur certains programmes. Déroulement de la leçon. Il y a 3 phases de cette séance de coaching. Il y a la pré-observation, il y a l'observation et le feedback. C'est un échange dans le but vraiment d'améliorer nos enseignements apprentissages de la lecture. Donc après chaque séance de coaching, on sent que l'enseignant s'est amélioré par rapport à la précédente.
Le programme Lecture pour tous intervient dans un domaine qui est au cœur du système éducatif. La lecture, c'est une activité qui donne la clé de réussite dans les apprentissages, parce que sans la lecture, il n'y a pas d'apprentissage. Et là, un des acquis importants dans le cadre du programme, c'est la formation des enseignants. Et en tant que responsable du système éducatif au niveau de la base, je peux dire que les acquis sont certains. Notre vision sur l'avenir, c'est le renforcement de cette approche d'abord. Quand cette approche va être installée et pérennisée carrément dans le système, nous pouvons avoir des résultats extrêmement importants.
So as you've seen, this was coaching and that interaction, whether through teacher learning circles, where there's group coaching happening, just that relationship again between educators has been so important to get to these, ultimately to the learning gains that we're all after. And these instructional support innovations, including coaching, have been incorporated into national reading and bilingual education reforms that are now launching in Senegal. And as those reforms scale even further and evolve, we know now as a community of practice that it's important to look at the details in terms of instructional support to teachers, the design of the different modalities and how it's conducted. And we know more now that it's important to look at the cost effectiveness of different modalities, at how you differentiate teacher support by teacher need. And those needs may be different from different regions because of the school community context as well. And finally, looking at the changes that may come in instructional support over different reform stages. It's not the same need at the beginning of a reform than it is later when you're talking about maintenance or when more teachers have been through pre-service education. So moving forward, these are the kinds of things we're looking for, learning more about as we continue to help ministries of education and educators around the world help their teachers master all of these new things and ultimately get kids learning. Thank you so much.
Good day, everyone. I'm Lydia Onoha. I worked on the USAID Northern Education Initiative Plus project as the Deputy Chief of Party. And I'm here to make this presentation on instructional support for effective large-scale programs, the NEI Plus experience. I would like to start with the project summary. The USAID funded Northern Education Initiative Plus project is a 5-year project with a focus on strengthening government systems to increase access and improve reading outcomes in 2 states in the north. The program trained teachers, and then the big question after training is what is next? And so the project focused on 2 instructional supports, which is ICT-based coaching and mentoring and professional learning communities to support teachers after training. The project adopted the coaching and mentoring support model. As you can see, the model shows SUBEB at the top, and then 2 key departments, quality assurance and school services, were saddled with the task of improving teaching and learning outcomes and its performance in schools by supporting teachers through coaching and mentoring. The project worked hand in hand with SUBEB and its units in supporting and strengthening the capacity of school support officers. This is also broken down into how much support the classroom teacher gets. You can see SS school support officers are providing support. The NEI Plus reading team were also providing support, head teachers, and at the center of all this is the ICT, which is technology-driven approach to teacher support. In supporting teachers, we started by training about 650 school support officers. We provided the school support officers with tablets, and in these tablets, we had modeled good classroom videos in these tablets. We also provided the coaches with my coaching record, which is a reflective journal on how well they carry out their activities. In addition to this, teachers also have a reflective journal as well that summarizes their performance in the classroom. Teachers were equipped with tablets, and alongside these are also Pico projectors that are easy to move about. In supporting teachers, we also ensure that we worked with systems that have been set up in States Universal Basic Education Board. So we worked hand in hand with quality assurance personnel. These were trained to conduct routine school supervision, conduct lesson observation, and provide real-time feedback using the tablets that have been provided. The coaches were engaged in coaching activities, which includes classroom observation, providing constructive feedback, providing spot checks in the classroom, modeling good lessons and co-teaching, helping teachers set achievable goals, and supporting the teacher learning circles and the cluster learning circles in different local government areas. The mobile lesson observation provision had very outstanding features. The mobile-based application is evidence-based and user-friendly and can run on mobile-based Android phone or Java phone. It can also support multiple language inputs and is equipped with solar chargers and power banks in case of a power failure. In the use of the tablets to conduct lesson observations, this has been divided into domains. We have about 5 domains. And so a coach opens the tablet, clicks on each of the domain as he or she begins the lesson observation. For example, domain 1 covers use of TLM and lesson preparation. The coach clicks on this and a rubric pops up. The rubric gives the coach an extended information on what to look out for each of the domains as he or she carries out the lesson observation and providing feedback at the end of the lesson. Connected to the ICT-based coaching and mentoring support is the professional learning community structure. This structure is so established that within a cluster, 6 teachers from 6 schools meet bi-weekly to look at their issues, look at challenges in the classroom, and also discover new ways of solving some of these problems. So teachers have this provision of meeting in clusters, and every month about 6 clusters form the cluster learning circles. And so together they look at issues, and together they also solve issues. So this encourages a lot of peer support and teacher autonomy. This process is also supported by some of these materials, the coaching materials, the coaching guide, and the teacher learning cycle guide, as well as the teacher training manual. The progress we recorded using this approach is not without challenges. We had funding issues, lack of funds for school visits for school support officers. We also had the problem of teacher capacity. Most of the teachers have a low capacity in conducting early grade reading lessons in the classroom. We also had the problem of teacher recruitment process and deployment. Most of the times, most of the teachers trained are transferred indiscriminately. And so the cycle continues, which was a huge problem for the project. We also have the challenge of similar reading programs working in the same space. This caused a lot of confusion for teachers as to which program to really hook onto. We also had the problem of coaches having difficulty using the tablets for coaching activities. Despite the challenges, we have a lot of positive outcomes. We have improved capacity of 650 school support officers who are domiciled in SUBEB, which of course means that this would help to sustain the program even after the life of the NEI Plus project. Over 12,000 teachers were supported in best practice, and the percentage of learners meeting the reading benchmarks increased. School support officers were trained outside of the initiative scope, so there was scale up even before the end of the NEI Plus project in both states. We also established state-based ICT supported coaching and mentoring system with tablets, with dashboard, and community structures were activated to support the process. And then the scale up of EGRA model through the World Bank Better Education Service Delivery for All in 6 states in Nigeria. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Meenal. I work with Room to Read Global Office as the technical lead for literacy program in South Asia. This is the Room to Read comprehensive literacy approach where we bring together the science and the magic of reading through classroom instruction, library program, and high-quality reading materials. For the purpose of this presentation, I will focus on the aspect of instructional support utilized in the SERI program in India. There are 4 aspects of instructional support that I'll be highlighting from SERI. These are training, coaching, teacher meetings, and materials, and I'll be talking through each one of them. For us to ensure successful scale-up, it was really critical to have government ownership of training design and content right from the start. So a committee from the state-level academic body called the SCRT reviewed the instruction materials and training modules. They asked teachers for feedback and visited the program schools. The committee then discussed the observations and suggestions with the Room to Read team, and their suggestions were incorporated into the training modules while keeping intact the key elements of our design. Also, in terms of training days, there were only a limited number of face-to-face training days available for the teachers. So a joint group with the government was set up for SERI, called the State Resource Group. And in consultation with this group, it was decided to have a combination of center-based trainings and school-based trainings. Teacher trainings, whether center-based or school-based, followed the same gradual release of responsibility approach, that is, I do, we do, you do, that the teachers are expected to follow with students in the classroom. Hence, there was a lot of emphasis on modeling and practicing of skills during the training sessions. On-site coaching played a critical role in the success of the program. The coaches really focused on building relationships of trust with the teachers. Their role was to provide support to teachers and not to judge or evaluate them. Coaches used an observation tool while observing teachers in the classrooms, where the points of observations were listed in the order of priority. These included the teacher's understanding of the objectives of the lesson, whether they were following teacher guides or not, ensuring children's participation, understanding children's learning levels, and then providing support to children as per their needs. Coaches had meetings with teachers after lessons, and in a positive and collaborative manner, they discussed how the class went. They talked to teachers about things that the teachers felt they had done well in the class, and then pointed out one area for the teacher to work on. In the subsequent class, the coaches observed the teachers again and followed through to make sure there was progress on the area they'd identified the last time. The teacher meetings were also very, very helpful. The monthly review meetings provided an opportunity for teachers to reflect on their progress, their successes, as well as their challenges. They talked about things that were going well and what were the steps that the teachers had taken to make it happen. The teachers also talked about major challenges that they were facing and what could be the possible solutions to these challenges. So the meetings were held in a manner that there was ample time for peer discussion and feedback, and structured so they could reflect on the overall improvement in children's learning. There was a variety of resource materials to support the teachers. There were teacher guides to simplify the entire planning and teaching process. They provided daily lesson plans which explained each step in the process. The instruction routines followed the I do, we do, you do approach, so the teachers understood exactly how to take it into their classroom. In SERI, student books were developed which were aligned with the state curriculum while retaining Room to Read literacy approach. They were used consistently by the teachers in the classroom and supported the students' learning progress. So that's an overview of the 4 components of the instructional support that we wanted to highlight. Thank you for listening. And now we have a short clip which talks more in detail about the SERI program and particular aspects of the support. Thank you.
Government school teachers play a pivotal role in the SERI project. To apprise teachers of the new teaching design, a pool of master trainers were given intensive training by Room to Read. In turn, these master trainers gave training to other teachers in the new pedagogy. Rekha Bora is one of the master trainers from Champavat. She also implemented the SERI project in her own school and could experience its impact.
2016 में हमने प्रोग्राम शुरू किया था। वो फर्स्ट वाला बच्चा थर्ड में आ गया। उस बच्चे को आप कहीं से लिखा दीजिए, कहीं से बोल दीजिए, कहीं पे उससे प्रश्न पूछ दीजिए, वो बिल्कुल एक स्वतंत्र पाठक का ये बन गया।
लिखना कैसे है?
The success of SERI is also because of its very comprehensive literacy approach, whereby there is a focus on reading skills and reading habits. Along with Room to Read's literacy facilitators, the government education officials conducted regular observation visits and provided feedback to the teachers.
Last year, 939 विद्यालयों का अनुस्मरण किया। आज की डेट में मैं कॉन्फिडेंस के साथ कह सकता हूँ हमारे 90% बच्चे चंपावत में हिंदी पढ़ लेते हैं।
पहली देहरादून की मीटिंग में कल्पना करके आए थे कि ऐसा हमारे वहाँ भी होगा। मुझे लगता है कि वो हम अचीव कर पाए।
Okay, great. And if we can now have our panelists, thank you so much for your presentations. And sorry if any of the videos came across blurry, or it seems like we're having some small bandwidth issues. But if the panelists could please come on video and join us, we'll move into the Q&A session. Great. So just to give you guys fair warning, Jennifer, I'm going to start with you with there was a theme of questions about the materials. And then after that, Minal and Lydia, I have a question for the two of you looking at coaching and teacher meetings. And then these are our questions coming through from the chat, and we're trying to group them to kind of address similar themes at once. So Jennifer, to kick things off, you know, there was a lot of interest in the Q&A on the teacher guides. And so I think this is really a three-part question, if you're ready for it. So the first part being, you know, do you see the provision of highly structured teachers' guides as being in tension with supporting teachers' confidence in their own decision-making in the classroom? And, you know, what facilitates that confidence? The second part being, you know, did the development of these teacher guides require any type of curriculum reform? And did you, you know, face instances where the curriculum framework required more content than what was appropriate for good guides or good teaching? And then the third part is just thinking about, you know, you've been working in the sector for 20 years. Structured teacher guides are not new. Is there, you know, is it something about the activities, the pacing? From your perspective, what about these guides really saw increased time on task among students? And I can repeat any of those if you
No, they're all great questions. I hope you can hear me okay. So the first question I actually answered in the chat, but I'll do so briefly now. So the question of, I mean, this is a great ongoing question, I think, in our field, right? That tension between structure and space, structure and teacher discretion. I would just say that for the context in Senegal and elsewhere where I've worked, actually in the United States as well, there is a lot to be gained from taking out the guesswork from these teachers. Again, as I said, particularly in times of reform where the teachers have not yet had education themselves on reading instruction. And we should not be expecting every single teacher to have mastered the science of reading and what the kids need and what those routine instruction, the instructional routines in the routine lessons should look like. So that is absolutely critical. And I talked a little bit more in the chat about how you balance that with space in the timetable during the day and during the week, where teachers can use their discretion. And we need additional training for that, but also tools. For instance, looking at student assessment, if you're getting these kinds of results from your students, then here's some of those responses. And we're starting to work on more of those if-then tools that give a menu of options to the teachers, and then that builds their confidence.
there's more scaffolding as these reforms evolve. And it's one thing we don't talk about enough as a community of practice. Reforms evolve. There are things that are introduced for the first time, and there are certain tools you need at the earlier stages. And just like we scaffold for student learning, we need to be scaffolding for teacher learning. And then some of those scaffolds can start to fall away once the teachers themselves and the instructional leaders that are helping them master these things over time as pre-service training comes more online. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'll leave it there. There's the excellent question about guides versus curriculum. And I'm speaking, as we say in French, sur la permission, and with others who are online who know more about this than I do. We have Mamdou Lee from ARED, for instance. There's a process again in the reforms where you're often not targeting the curriculum first, because there's a sovereignty and there's a codification and an institutional level there that makes it difficult to come in swinging right at the curriculum. It's a process. And for Lecture pour tous and for Senegal, we started with supporting the ministry to first pilot these new approaches to reading. Now, we were piloting in half the country, so it was a very large pilot. But so what that meant for the teachers' guides, we talked about it as some gymnastics that we had to conduct to try to introduce a scope and sequence and lesson plannings that aligned with the existing curriculum, but knowing that along the way, that curriculum was probably going to get reformed because it hadn't yet been informed by the evidence base about how kids get reading, and to say nothing of the introduction of mother tongue, that wasn't yet in the curriculum. So it was a process of gymnastics, is what we called it, to get to the point where we could at least show results. And what's happening right now in Senegal, what is so exciting, is that they are now at that process of revising the curriculum and having all of these things be completely aligned. But it's a process. Did I hit? I feel like there was one more question.
Absolutely. Oh, and the last piece was just, and I think you've touched on this a little bit, talking about scaffolding and other things, but just, what was really unique about maybe the content in these teacher guides that saw more time on task?
We're paying way more attention to the science now. I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, 20 years ago, we knew about active pedagogy. We knew of different kinds of pedagogy. And I think the best of our work 20, 15 years ago was good in that way. We're still using effective teacher techniques, but we know more about the science of reading now, the neurology, the science behind that, and what kids actually need and how you pace, and that systematic approach based on phonics. And so the teacher's guides reflect that, right? So there's that intersection between the two. We also know more about effective teaching. We don't talk about it as much in the Learning at Scale study, but there's a growing global topology of what makes effective teaching. So it's also the stuff sort of in between the lines. There's the lesson plans, but the guides can also include some of these classic, now they're becoming classic, we're seeing them work in classrooms around the world, of small micro things that teachers do. So for instance, wait time. Wait for a minute, and allow other students to respond. And those kinds of prompts can be built into the teacher's guides as a reminder. So we know more, we're paying closer attention to the evidence, we're generating more evidence around the world and in Senegal and in these contexts, and we're building that back into the guides. So again, we don't expect every single teacher to be on the latest on all of the pedagogy and the evidence, but those teachers are also generating their own evidence from what works in those classrooms. And the more that we can learn about what those techniques are, and then amplify and replicate that to other teachers, that's the facilitating role that I think we play as technical assistants, and it's certainly the ministries of education play.
That's great. Thank you so much. It was funny to hear you say time on task. I remember as a teacher, like having to count in my head to 8 seconds, because it's terrifying when nobody answers
the wait time.
Yeah.
It's scary waiting for a few seconds even.
I mean, I used to just answer my own questions and have a whole successful 45-minute class.
That's right.
myself. So thanks
That's
so
right.
much, Jennifer. That's
no, and when if you have a guy that tells you that that's important to do, that gives you that confidence, right?
You need those frequent reminders. Absolutely, absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm gonna now move to Lydia and Meenal. It's up to you who wants to go first, but both of your programs, NEI Plus and SERI, had teacher meetings and also had coaching. And so we'd like to hear a little bit more coming out of the Q&A about the relationship between the coaching and the teacher meetings, who is managing these, how much time and energy did it take to support each of these approaches? Were these embedded in the larger system of teacher professional development through the government? And then, this is the tough question, if you had to say which of these was more effective, or were there elements of each that were only effective with one another? How did you see these two coming together to support teachers? So whoever wants to take those first, and I can repeat if needed.
Yeah, I'd like to go first. Thank you so much. The professional learning community structure was highly effective. Why do I say so? Teachers had the opportunity for the first time to peer mentor, help one another, listen to one another, share challenges in the classroom, and work together to also provide solutions, share learning from training. So for the first time, for so many years, teachers have worked in isolation, working alone. But for the first time, we see teachers coming together, realizing the potentials they have amongst themselves. And we did not carry out this approach in isolation of the system. The SUBEB, which is State Universal Basic Education Board, was fully involved. We had key units in the ministry that were in SUBEB that were part of the whole structure. And so there was a documentation of the meetings, there was a record of these meetings. And remember, it is ICT based. And so as these meetings occur, all information are uploaded instantly to the dashboard. So it's so organized that communities, local government, towns gave testimonies about the effectiveness of this strategy. Aside from this, we also put in place a structure that would continue even after the life of the project. And so it was about system strengthening the system, ensuring that we had personnel from the SUBE, from the ministry, who were part of the whole exercise. And so the arrangement was that teachers meet in clusters of 6 and in clusters of, they meet bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, 1 hour. And strictly, they were guided. There was usually there was an agenda that teachers focus on. It was not a time for them to talk about their welfare, or I moved from a long distance to school and all that, but it was for them to focus on situations in the classroom, particularly early grade reading teachers, what they face with the children, how they conduct assessments, how they conduct their lessons, and how well they implement fidelity of implementation in the classroom. They were not left alone. We had coaches attached to each of the clusters. And so we get constant reports from each of the clusters. And so this continued. And as I speak, it is still a structure in place in the states that we intervened.
So thanks, Rachel. There are quite a few sub-questions there. I'll try and touch upon each one of them. In terms of coaching, what worked well was both the process and the structure. So coaches were essentially trained and oriented on building a relationship of trust with the teachers, as opposed to inspecting teachers or evaluating teachers. So that was the bedrock on which that relationship was basically formed. And coaches had a very structured observation tool where points of observation were listed in a clear order of priority. So it went from basic to more complex areas of observation. And then post lessons, so coaches were oriented on how to observe the lesson, not to interrupt, only jump in, if requested and so on. And after the lesson, the coach would actually sit down with the teacher and have a very positive, collaborative conversation around what went well, what did the teacher think herself she did well in the class, and then one area to work on. So not to overwhelm her with too many points of feedback, but just to identify one area to work on. And then in the next class, the next time the coach came and observed the same teacher, they would go back to the notes and see, jointly evaluate if there was progress made on that one area. So more feedback wouldn't be given till that one particular area was addressed, and that's doable. You just have one point of feedback. But the spirit of it was very friendly, and that's how the coaching system worked. Teacher meetings worked more through peer feedback, where teachers got an opportunity, and again there was a structure provided on how those meetings would be conducted. So what went well, what was your contribution, what did you do to make it well, what are some challenges that you all face, and can we brainstorm together on how we can address those challenges, and what are the larger trends of improvement that we see in our classroom. So again, there was a structure provided. So both of them have different values, coaching as well as teacher meetings. I wouldn't be able to pick one. It's not either or, it's and. They all come together and contribute to the success of the program. And in terms of how it's going to endure, so each of these have been embedded, or they were already part of the government system. They were just not happening the way they were envisaged. So in India, in SERI project, there is actually a whole resource of cluster resource coordinators. They are called, the government officials whose job it is to mentor teachers. But over time, and given the scale of the country and the number of schools, they often turn into, they turn more into admin tasks. So their job becomes more to look at administration issues. And what we did was actually do joint monitoring visits with them, and again, focus more on the aspect of mentoring, coaching, and less on inspecting. And that just brought it alive to them that yes, actually, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Similarly, we worked with them on conceptualizing and developing very simple monitoring formats, which align with existing monitoring formats, but then also take in elements from Room to Read's program. So that gives them a sustainable way of continuing to coach and mentor even after the life of the project. And similarly, monthly meetings is part of the government system. They're supposed to happen, and you are supposed to do peer discussions. But again, they were often turning into more like administration discussions or issues which were not related to academics. So again, brought life back to them and provided a clear structure on how these meetings could be conducted, where teachers actually have a structured space to reflect and support each other. Tell me if I missed any sub question. I tried to touch upon all of them.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Meenal. And Meenal, you actually went ahead and answered my next question, which was around, we saw from both Sari's presentation and lecture Pertus's that there was a real shift in attitudes among coaches away. And even in Senegal, a lot of the coaches were inspectors. And so it's even more challenging to shift them towards a more supportive and less punitive kind of approach. And so I guess my next question coming through the Q&A is for you, Jennifer, because you may not have sort of addressed it. How did you facilitate that attitude shift among coaches?
This is the moment where I really wish I had other colleagues on to answer, because I think they have a more instinctual feel for this. I mean, it's hard. We don't have a lot of hard data to totally explain it. From what I personally have observed and what I understand, the process itself, the process itself of observing something objective, first of all, and everyone can come together. We know what the goal is, right? So it actually goes back a little bit to the guides. Like there's a common understanding, first of all, of the goal. And that actually starts with something we didn't mention, which is, although I think it came up in a question, which is around student standards. So we also had been part of a process of helping the ministry develop for the first time, national standards for reading. So there's, first of all, there's that element that we've talked about as a community of expectation setting, goal setting. And so that takes, first of all, it takes away the personal element of it a little bit, right? We're all focused on the same goal. And we know what that goal is. And, you know, it's all about achieving that goal. So I think that's the first piece of it. And then we have the tools, we don't have the tools to achieve that goal. So once you kind of come to a common objective, then you can say, how can I help you achieve that objective, right? It's less like, you know, why isn't this happening? But, oh yeah, right, we have these tools, we have this goal. And then that process of observing that together and then sitting down, you saw the two educators sit down at the end, you know, and the coach says, you know, and I'm seeing her progress. So that also that element of, oh, this is working. I'm seeing the teacher practice change and I'm seeing students reading, right? So I think those results spoke for themselves, that the more we can have this common understanding and this mutually beneficial relationship, we're going to get results.
Hello,
and so that's going to motivate you more to do that. Sorry, please go ahead.
Our flight is soon, the plane is soon landing.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I think the tools that help that kind of, you know, outlines the process and the practice. And the final thing I'll say is the practice. We spent a lot of time in training on this because we anticipated that it would be an issue. Honestly, to be honest, we were a little uncomfortable in the beginning, understanding who the coaches were going to be. And we read the research. We knew that this could be an issue, getting from evaluative to more of that trusted relationship and support. And so we also just spent a huge amount of time practicing during trainings, like how would you provide that feedback? And so, you know, how do you know that people can do it? Because you've seen them do it. And that element of modelization and evaluation during a training was really also key.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jennifer. And so, Jennifer, you talked a bit about practice as well as, you know, supporting this friendlier approach by coaches. The next question is for Matthew and Jessica. You know, some of our big headline findings on teacher support are around, you know, these successful programs achieving increased teacher confidence, the friendliness and approachability of those people tasked to support teachers, and also just giving teachers more time to practice. From the panel today, we've heard that a lot of this was done through a very structured approach. So I'd like to ask, does that surprise you that, you know, does it surprise you that a lot of the findings from these programs was around sort of softer aspects and skills? And also, does it surprise you that, you know, to achieve this, a lot of our panelists are talking about a very, very structured approach?
Thanks. Matthew, if you wanted to say anything, but I can start if you want. Yeah, so I would say neither of those things really surprised me. I think the softness and the kindness are kind of just, you know, just how we treat people. We talk about in training of giving feedback even to students, of telling them what they've done right and telling them, you know, where they need to change or make better. I think that's just kind of like a very kind of common approach to giving some critical feedback. And I think we're really trying to, as everyone has kind of noted, is change this idea from inspection to a collaborative relationship. And that's basically, you know, my best way to know how to do that is to make these conversations friendlier. And the structure, I think, kind of comes in because we are changing people's job roles really significantly. And as I noted earlier, like, some of these coaches have never taught in primary school, so they just need more ways to focus them, at least in the beginning. I mean, it's just a lot of scaffolding and a lot of support because it kind of, in some ways, everybody's learning a new job, and that's not necessarily easy. So having some tools and some structure, I think, has really supported these new learnings. I don't know, Matthew, if you have something to add.
Yeah, similar. I mean, I'm not surprised by these findings in that they don't strike me as odd, but I think when I first saw them, I was kind of thinking, wow, I don't think we've talked a lot about this. Like, I think that a lot of the findings that we looked at in previous sort of research into support for teachers was very focused on, like, hard aspects of monitoring and coach tool design. And so it was nice to see that softer element come out, and particularly because it wasn't, I don't think it was high up there in our hypotheses. It sort of came out of what teachers told us, which is always nice when you get that kind of finding. And on the structure, I think that also doesn't surprise me. My rule of thumb is that kind of structure gets you from up to sort of 5 or 6 out of 10, and then maybe you need some more autonomy to get beyond that. But I think structure always helps. If you emailed me a short list of how to give a webinar right now, I'm sure it would help.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Matthew. Thanks, Jessica. So the last comment, there's a lot more in the Q&A, and I'm sorry to not get to it all. For time, I want to move ahead. There was a lot in the Q&A. One of our big findings that a number of panelists talked about is the importance of this face-to-face engagement, especially at the beginning with teachers. And we've all, we're coming out of 2 years of having to rapidly adapt programming in response to COVID and using blended approaches. So there are a number of questions in the chat that, aren't specifically aligned to our findings, but I'd like to open this up to the whole panel. Do you all think that the use of technology has a place in teacher training specifically? And what do you think the implications for virtual training will be for teachers going forward? And similarly for coaching, what worked? And I know, Lydia, you had a very highly technology supported approach to coaching. What worked there? And where did you meet the most resistance? So anyone that wants to tackle that first. Thanks.
Yeah. I'd like to go first to what has been running in my mind, and that's around the coaches support the teachers. Who supports the coaches? That's very critical. Yeah, because we trained the coaches in the NEI Plus project, and we trained them to be able to support the teachers. We also provided a companion for the coaches. And that's where the tablet, that's where the technology comes in. All that the coach needs for each observation, for each support activity, are all embedded in the tablet. It's just at the click of some buttons, the coach gets responses to his questions, to questions that teachers ask, to questions that parents ask, questions that even pupils, school authorities ask. The tablet was a companion, and it's still a companion because the process is still on. Because of the way it's structured in such a way that the system itself was strengthened to be able to support the process even at the end of the project. And so the tablet served as a companion for the coaches in terms of training them, in terms of updating their knowledge. And our ICT unit was also on ground to update the tablets based on findings from the field, based on results of lesson observation, based on pre-test and post-test of training. Back to the question around using technology for training. Well, it depends on the context. As a project, the NEI Plus approach to this was quite effective, particularly during COVID. But before then, we prepared. It was like we saw ahead of time what was going to happen. And so we had our materials in digital forms. We had audio materials. And then we set up WhatsApp groups even before COVID. And so the WhatsApp groups, teachers were divided into clusters. and each cluster was supported by a coach. And so even before COVID, we had teachers communicate on a platform where they come together. So it's not just about the physical training for teachers, it's also about online meetings where they talk about their lessons, how to improve, their challenges and all that, and how to support one another. And so making the tablets a companion to the coaches was quite useful, and getting the system involved at every step of the way was also very, very effective.
I'd like to jump in and support that. So this question of who supports the coaches is so critical. It's hard enough to get the coaching to happen, and then you have to figure out how to coach the coaches. So I'm so glad you brought that up, and you guys have such a sophisticated way of doing that. I'm hoping we can get to that in more places as access to technology and support to technology evolves. I just want to note that so we did conduct a small scale RCT with cost effectiveness. I put the link into the chat on different coaching modalities. And one thing we found is that there was an immediate result from coaching the coach. The coaching the coach had always been part of the original model in Senegal. It just wasn't happening. And so we tested 3 different models. One was the base model, the original model with in-person or at-school coaches from who had school directors, the inspectors who were supposed to travel out and barely did. And then we, as we designed it with the ministry, we had constraints, right? We couldn't just test anything we wanted because it had to be something that ultimately the system was going to be able to sustain. So within those limits, we also tested telecoaching by head inspectors at the district level who called teachers and coaches, right? So coaching teachers and coaching coaches, and has had the same idea with supplemental in-person coaching by a nearby senior director. So the 2 alternative modalities were far more effective than the original. But what was interesting is that coaching of coaches meant that the school director was also coaching better. So the original person who's supposed to be coaching. So that's a critical factor in this. I'll just point out that I can share the link to our brief again. The sheer cost differential between phoning and visiting means that the telecoaching was orders of magnitude more cost effective, because we were getting similar results, but with much less cost. Now, the in-person is still more effective, but this is exactly where I think we need to go as a field. If we're worth our weight in salt as technical assistants to anybody, this cost factor is critical. And it's the alternatives to different modalities in your same context over time. Also, this was a short study, we need to see over time. And again, as reforms evolve, because the needs change, what ultimately, if you're sitting as a finance director, as a planning director within the Ministry of Education, how are you going to make your decisions? That has to be a factor. In addition to things being feasible and also politically feasible. So in the case of the RCT in Senegal, the results were very clear that telecoaching could help and in person, but that would mean a really important power shift in how things are done. And it would mean really important institutional changes. That wasn't forthcoming at the time of our findings. And so there's also, we need to remember, there's a contextual analysis and frankly, a political economy element to these kinds of changes too. They're not just technical solutions. You need that information, but then there's a process and a dialogue that needs to happen at the national level.
That's great. Thanks, Jennifer. And I think you're getting a lot of support and, agreement in the chat. Minal, for time, we have to move on. And so I'm going to hand back over to Alice, but please, if you have anything to add from your experiences, using more technology, please feel free to add those in the chat or the Q&A. And thanks again to all of our panelists. Back to you, Alice.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks to all of the panelists for sharing their insights. It was a really thought-provoking conversation. I wish we had even more time to explore some of those ideas in more detail, but hopefully our speakers will be around for the next 15 minutes or so and can attend to any remaining questions in the chat. Now, we asked you earlier in the session to share your reflections. We asked you what reflections and questions arise for you as a result of hearing the key findings. And as I said earlier, we're going to have the opportunity to ask Matthew and Jessica just to pick out a couple of the reflections that were shared and provide some further comments from them. So Matthew, Jessica, from looking at some of the reflections that were shared, what particularly stuck in your mind, and what do you want to draw attention to as we think about wrapping up today?
So I think we had questions really in three categories. Like the first one was this coaching model that you're talking about sounds great, but how do you get government buy-in and how do you get systems to support it? And the second two really relate to the question we just talked about, which was about whether face-to-face is the only way and what other models. So Jess, do you want to kick off and talk a little bit about system support?
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one. I will say the best answer to that question might be found in our next webinar, as Alice is probably happy for me to plug that. It is very focused on the system, so definitely come to that. I would say talking about, getting systems on board and just how we kind of do that. I mean, at least for Tusome in particular, the project really focused on the ministry from the very beginning. Everything was kind of done through and with the ministry, and the project is considered the ministry's project, right? So the implementation is mostly like technical assistance, but everything was run through the ministry. So our coaches are ministry officials. All of their bosses have kind of also been trained. The quality assurance folks have been trained. There's been a lot of training, a lot of co-development of materials like training manuals now and books as well. So that has really helped get people on board for sure. It's not always easy, and in particular, Tusome also had an advantage that I don't think most projects have, of having 4 years of kind of a smaller project in country before it got scaled up. So that also was really, really useful in being able to show gains with those kinds of system level activities like coaching.
Great, thanks, Jess. And just to say that, as Jess said, we're going to present these findings on system support in another webinar, but the brief should be available to download now. And just to give you a little preview, the things that we found were important were aligning programs with existing government plans, programs establishing clear priorities for instructional changes, communicating expectations down through the system, regular monitoring and capacity building efforts we found were key. And the monitoring, I think, stems nicely from the conversation about technology. I know that Tusome used tablets well to monitor coach visits to schools and be able to get instant sort of uploads of who was monitoring. Yeah, and so then the second question, there was, I guess, another theme was around lots of people appreciating the focus on the sort of supportive and collaborative approach to coaching. And I guess it relates also to the question about whether face-to-face training is the only way, which sort of continues the discussion we were just having with the panelists. I think a couple of things to point out from our findings. One was that there was an emphasis on face-to-face training, at least initially. And if you have a look at some of the other findings, I think there's sort of clues to why that is. It's about modeling and giving time to practice is important, and establishing a collaborative and supportive relationship with teachers. So you can see how all of these things are easier to achieve in person. Our findings definitely don't say that technology is not the way forward. We're just drawing commonalities amongst effective programs. But I think the aspects of what makes face-to-face training successful that I just outlined give you a clue to the challenges you have. Those are the things you're going to have to tackle through remote support if it's going to be successful. But I think those were the main categories of reflection. So thanks everyone for sending in your thoughts.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Matthew and Jessica, for sharing your reflections on the audience's reflections. So we have a few more minutes before we pass over to our final speaker, Dr. Benjamin Piper, the Director of the Global Education Programme at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for his closing remarks. In that time, I'd like to draw your attention to two upcoming events beautifully plugged by Jessica and Matthew. So the first is actually an event next week. It's an in-person event, which is very exciting after this long period of virtual meetings. On Tuesday, May 31st, we are going to be sharing findings from the Tusome early grade reading activity about improving outcomes at scale in Kenya. This is an in-country event in Nairobi. And if you're based in Nairobi and would like to join, please do drop me an email and we'll make sure that you've got all of the information. My email address is on there. And then, of course, the systems support webinar, the third in our series, is coming up on July the 6th. You've had a bit of a taster, and some of the questions I think are really showing the demand for hearing more about that really important subject. So do join us for that and look out in your inboxes for information about registration. Before I pass over to Dr. Piper then, we also have our event evaluation form linked here on your screen. So again, by the QR code, and also the bit.ly link, which is going to come up in the chat as well. I am going to pause for a moment before I pass over to Dr. Piper to give you an opportunity to download, to access that link, to start to fill in some of your responses. I'm going to pause for a moment and play some music to encourage you to do so. It's really, really important to us that we're learning about how to improve these events. So please take just 30 seconds to a minute now to access that before I pass over to Dr. Piper. Thank you so much for that. Do complete those forms if you haven't had a chance to. And it's my great privilege to welcome Dr. Benjamin Piper from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to close our session today.
Thanks, Alice. And hi, everyone. Greetings from Malindi, Kenya. We've had a great time visiting schools the last couple of days. I want to just kind of take a higher level picture of the situation we're in. This issue of teacher support is top of mind for me. I was in a classroom today where a teacher was trying to teach this word that I just put in there. She was doing a good job of building on the phonics evidence that all of you have heard about learning scale study. Japanese letters, M-E-A-T, was trying to teach the kids how to decode that word. And the first time she told it as met. The second time she taught it time in there. She actually, oh, can you guys hear me?
And it's cutting out a little bit. I might turn off your video and just have the audio if that's
I think
right.
You're now back to sounding better though, Ben, than you were at the start.
We can turn off your video perhaps and just have the audio. Are you there, Ben? I think your video was okay, actually. It might be the headphones. Oh, there we go.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, very clear.
I'm calling in from Malindi, Kenya, which is apparently why the internet isn't working and you couldn't hear me. Just saying that we were in a classroom today where a teacher was trying to decode the word I put in the chat a second ago, act. And that's exactly how she taught it, act. And then the kids said met, some said mat, some said meet, but very few the latter. And just seeing that coach who is in the classroom trying to figure out how to give the support to the teacher based on that challenge. And I really think it's important for us to start from the title of this brief and the title of this session, which is teacher support. That teacher struggled with figuring out how to teach long vowels. I followed up with her afterwards. She hadn't been trained in the last 6 years. So she didn't actually know the long vowels. She didn't know EA said E. She didn't know that EE said E. She didn't know that AI said A. But with some support from some other professionals who cared about her ability to care about kids professionally and effectively, she was able to respond really well. And I think that idea of starting from the perspective that teachers can improve outcomes, but the question is how to do it is a really important outcome of the study. And as an ex-implementer, I used to be on the other side of the table. It really is a time where we're all desperate to improve learning outcomes. And I think that this study, along with others, shows that it is possible. It is possible at scale to improve outcomes, but it's not magic. I think that's one of the things that if I was an implementer still, I would want to hear. It's not magic. It doesn't mean that, there's like you just need to have talented people like Lydia and others leading programs. There are some things that work better than others. And I think being a participant in the Learning at Scale study and hearing the findings today, it's good to start from evidence and build from there. And to me, the evidence says there are kind of 5 key points that these 8 successful programs are more likely to do than others. Number 1, they have the teacher training that's using modeling and practice. It's not old style training. If you're thinking about doing teacher training, it's ones that are giving teachers the opportunity to build their skills. It's number 2, having teachers' guides for teachers, support to teachers. I was actually in a conversation with a teacher today asking her, would you wish you had a program that just lets you choose from the broad library of possible activities, or would you want something structured? And the real request was, I want structure. It takes more time to kind of figure out my lesson and I'm not sure what to do, so giving me structure. Number 3, that coaches are using structured tools to support teachers. And I really agree with the idea that that also could be supplemented by having coaching to the coaches. Face-to-face training methods. It doesn't mean it's only face-to-face. It could be supplemented by other things, but having face-to-face training methods was an element of these programs, and that these programs had student books at a 1-to-1 ratio. It's not magic, but there are some things that evidence is saying makes a difference. It also doesn't mean that if you do these 5 things that this Learning at Scale study talked about today, that impacts at scale are promised. Just doing a structured pedagogy program or a teaching life program doesn't mean the program will work. You really have to do it well. And I think as an implementer, I'm glad to see some of the things that these programs have said. From the Learning Lecture Pertus program in Senegal, cost effectiveness models of different coaching methods and figuring out what will work at scale. For NEI Plus, kind of using the targeted support targeted ICT to support coaching and the professional learning communities. For Siri, that coaches actually didn't just go to the classroom, they actually used their time to follow up on the things they talked about last time. So listen, we have to respond to learning loss. We have to respond to the learning crisis. That there's a report coming out pretty soon that's showing that the percentages of kids who are behind are dramatically increasing. We know that, but I think there's some solace to, even though the situation is dire, we have increasing evidence of the sort of programs that can work. And a lot of interventions that are thinking about remediation, thinking about catch up, thinking about trying to help kids move, that there are programs like the Learning at Scale ones that have some real evidence of work and of ability to work at scale. My closing comment is this. There's an increasing learning poverty, and that's worrisome. There's more kids who aren't reading. There's more kids who don't have the math skills. But I would really encourage you all to consider the best of teachers, to assume that a teacher like the one I observed today wants to do well, and with loving, kind support, they're willing to change and improve. I would encourage you to consider how to design support in response to feedback to help them, get the best of Learning at Scale. And I would lastly make sure we're considering scale. We're not trying to get the best superstar teacher to be 10% better. We're trying to make that middling teacher be 30% better. And programs that do the latter are differently designed. You want to have an average teacher in a rural school teach a lot better. And I'm glad to see that these Learning at Scale programs have done that. So thanks everybody for participating. Thanks Alice for leading us. Thanks to the Science of Teaching team for presenting this well. And congratulations to the 3 programs highlighted today and the broader Learning at Scale program family. And I appreciate your hard work and all the good work that we were able to hear about today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ben, and everyone for joining. We hope to see lots of you on the 6th of July and perhaps even some of you in Nairobi next week. Thank you for joining us.